Evelyn St. James adjusted the diamond bracelet on her wrist as she leaned against the marble railing, the sparkling city lights of Manhattan stretching before her. The annual St. James Foundation Gala bustled below, the clink of champagne glasses and the hum of cultured laughter filling the grand ballroom. It was the kind of night Evelyn had mastered, effortlessly poised. She moved through the evening with calculated charm, exchanging compliments and polite smiles with the city's elite. Yet, even surrounded by glittering luxury, she couldn't shake the gnawing emptiness that clung to her. Her father, Reginald St. James, towered over her, his commanding presence filling the space beside her. His sharp tuxedo and unyielding expression mirrored the power he wielded in the business world. Unlike Evelyn, who drifted through social events with indifference, Reginald thrived in this arena, using every interaction to further his empire. "Evelyn," he said, his voice cutting through the hum of chatter. "We need to talk." She turned to him, an eyebrow arched. "Now, can it wait until after the galas?" "No, it can't," he said firmly. His tone was sharp, final, the kind that allowed no room for debate. Evelyn straightened, her curiosity piqued despite herself. "Fine," she said, setting her champagne flute on a nearby tray. "What's so urgent it can't wait?" "You're leaving for Greenridge tomorrow," Reginald stated, his voice low but resolute. Evelyn blinked, caught off guard. "Greenridge? What is that? A new resort or some kind of project you've taken on?" "It's a town," he replied bluntly. "And you're going there to manage the St. James Inn for a year. Consider it your test." Her laugh echoed in the space between them, disbelief dripping from every syllable. "You must be joking. You want me to leave New York and play house in some dusty little town? Dad, this is absurd." "No, Evelyn," he said, his expression unyielding. "What's absurd is that you've spent your entire life coasting on privilege without understanding the value of hard work. If you want to inherit this family's legacy, you need to prove you're worthy of it." Evelyn opened her mouth to retort, but stopped when she saw the determined set of his jaw. This wasn't a suggestion. It was an ultimatum. She studied him for a long moment, hoping to detect some sign of softness. But Reginald's eyes were cold, his conviction unshakable. "You're serious," she said finally, her voice quieter now. "Dead serious," he replied. "If you can't make something of that in within a year, you'll forfeit your place in this family. No money, no shares, nothing." Evelyn felt a rush of anger rise in her chest, but it was tangled with something else, a small flicker of fear. She had always assumed her inheritance was a given, a reward for simply being who she was. The idea that she might lose it all was unthinkable. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You can't just send me away like this." "I can," Reginald said, his voice steady. "And I am." The weight of his words hung in the air as the gala swirled around them. Evelyn stared out at the city skyline, her mind racing. For the first time in her life, she felt the ground shift beneath her. The long drive to Greenridge felt like an exile. Evelyn stared out the window of the car as the city skyline gave way to sprawling fields and endless sky. Her driver, silent and stoic, navigated the bumpy country roads without so much as a glance in her direction. Evelyn's phone buzzed repeatedly, messages from friends and colleagues piling up, but she ignored them. She didn't have the energy to explain why she was vanishing from their world for a year. When they finally arrived at the St. James Inn, Evelyn stepped out of the car and immediately regretted her choice of footwear. Her designer heels sank into the uneven dirt driveway, and she frowned in disgust, glancing down at the dust that clung to her once pristine shoes. The building before her was worse than she'd imagined, a sagging, weathered structure with peeling paint, overgrown shrubs, and windows that looked like they hadn't been cleaned in years. It was a far cry from the luxury hotels she'd grown up in. "Well, you're here," a voice called out, interrupting her thoughts. Evelyn turned to see a man leaning against a pickup truck parked near the inn. He was tall, with sun-kissed skin and a slight smirk that made her bristle immediately. His jeans were worn, and his boots were caked with mud, as if he'd just come from wrestling a bull. "I'm Nathan Cole," he said, extending a hand. Handyman, part-time miracle worker, and the guy who's supposed to help you figure out how this place works? Evelyn stared at his hand for a moment before reluctantly shaking it. Evelyn St. James, she replied, her tone clipped. Though I'm sure you already knew that. Nathan's smirk widened. Hard not to. Your name's on the deed. Though I don't think that fancy last name's going to fix the plumbing or the roof. Evelyn ignored his comment and strode toward the inn, her heels clicking against the cracked stone walkway. The inside was somehow worse than the outside. Creaky floorboards, cobwebs in every corner, and a musty smell that clung to everything. She wrinkled her nose in disdain. How did it get this bad? Neglect, Nathan said, leaning against the doorframe. Places like this don't run themselves. Guess that's where you come in. Evelyn shot him a withering look, but said nothing. Instead, she wandered through the space, taking in the faded wallpaper and tarnished fixtures. It was clear the inn had once been grand, a relic of a bygone era, but now it was a shadow of its former self. By the time evening fell, Evelyn was exhausted. She dragged her suitcases into one of the upstairs rooms, muttering under her breath about the state of the place. The room was small and sparsely furnished, with a bed that looked older than she was. She sat on the edge of the mattress and stared out the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The fields beyond the inn were bathed in golden light, and for a brief moment, the beauty of it caught her off guard. Despite her frustration, a small voice whispered in the back of her mind, maybe this isn't the end of the world. Morning came earlier than Evelyn expected. She was jolted awake by the sound of clanging metal and muffled voices outside her window. Groggy, she pulled the curtains aside and saw Nathan unloading tools from the back of his truck. The bright sunlight glinting off the dewy grass was a stark contrast to her dark mood. Dragging herself out of bed, she threw on a pair of yoga pants and a designer sweatshirt, her best attempt at casual attire. As she stepped outside, the crisp morning air hit her, along with the scent of freshly cut grass and something faintly metallic. Nathan noticed her approach and raised an eyebrow. Finally awake, princess. Evelyn crossed her arms, her annoyance flaring. I didn't realize we were on a military schedule. You're not in New York anymore, he replied, smirking. Here, the day starts early, and there's always work to do. Speaking of which, I hope you're ready to get your hands dirty. She frowned, scanning the pile of tools and materials at his feet. What exactly do you expect me to do? Well, for starters, you can help me clear out the storage shed, he said, gesturing toward a small building behind the inn. Its roof sagged precariously, and vines crept up its sides. It's packed with junk, and we need to make space for the supplies coming in. Evelyn hesitated, but Nathan's expectant look left her little choice. She followed him to the shed, her heels clicking against the gravel until she realized how impractical they were. Sighing, she kicked them off and trudged forward in her socks. The shed was worse than she'd imagined. Boxes were piled haphazardly, and the air was thick with dust. Evelyn wrinkled her nose as she picked up a cracked porcelain lamp. Why is this even here? Nathan shrugged. People tend to hold on to things, even when they're useless. Kind of like how you brought all those designer bags to a rundown inn. She shot him a glare, but didn't respond. As the hours passed, her frustration grew. The work was physically exhausting, and every item she moved seemed to coat her hands in another layer of grime. By noon, her arms ached, and her mood was as sour as the stagnant air in the shed. When she finally emerged, her hair disheveled and her face streaked with dirt, Nathan handed her a glass of water. Not bad, he said, a hint of approval in his tone. You lasted longer than I thought you would. Evelyn didn't have the energy to retort. Instead, she gulped down the water and collapsed onto the steps of the porch. For the first time, she noticed the quiet beauty of the countryside, the gentle rustle of leaves, the distant hum of cicadas, the way the sunlight filtered through the trees. It was different from the constant noise of the city, and though she wouldn't admit it, it was almost peaceful. The next few days followed a similar pattern. Evelyn woke early to Nathan's persistent knocks, spent the day tackling various tasks around the inn, and collapsed into bed each night feeling more drained than the last. The physical labor was grueling, and her body, unaccustomed to such exertion, protested with every movement. One morning, as she scrubbed the kitchen floor, Margie Parker, the inn's cook, walked in with a tray of freshly baked biscuits. Margie was a plump woman with a warm smile and a sharp wit. She had been with the inn for decades and seemed to know its every creak and groan. "You're doing better than I thought you would," Margie said, setting the tray on the counter. "Though I have to say, I never expected to see a St. James scrubbing floors." Evelyn looked up, wiping sweat from her brow. "Trust me, it wasn't my idea." Margie chuckled, her laughter filling the room. "You remind me of your mother, you know? She had that same fire in her when she first married your father." Evelyn froze, the mention of her mother catching her off guard. "You knew my mother?" "Oh, honey, I worked here long before you were born," Margie said, her smile softening. "Your mother had big dreams for this place. She wanted it to be more than just an inn. She wanted it to be a home." Evelyn swallowed hard, the weight of her mother's legacy settling over her. She had always thought of the inn as a forgotten relic, but hearing Margie's words made her see it in a different light. Later that evening, as Evelyn attempted to patch a leak in the roof, Nathan appeared, his expression unreadable. "You're doing it wrong," he said, taking the tools from her hands. "I didn't ask for your help," she snapped, her frustration boiling over. "And yet, here I am," he replied, climbing onto the ladder. "You're welcome." Evelyn watched in silence as he worked, his movements efficient and precise. Despite her annoyance, she couldn't help but admire his skill. When he finished, he climbed down and handed her the tools. "Next time, ask before you make it worse." She glared at him, but said nothing. Her pride was too bruised to admit he was right. That night, as she lay in bed, exhaustion gave way to doubt. She thought about her father's ultimatum, the inn's crumbling walls, and the mountain of work still ahead of her. For the first time since arriving, she wondered if she had made a mistake in staying. The thought lingered as she drifted off to sleep, her dreams filled with visions of her mother, and the inn as it once was, a place of light and laughter, a far cry from its current state. Evelyn woke with the morning sun streaming through the thin curtains of her room. Her body ached from days of work, but something felt different this time, a faint flicker of determination. For days, her frustration had mounted, and she had clashed with Nathan and the relentless demands of the inn. Yet, Margie's words about her mother had lingered, planting a seed of purpose she couldn't ignore. As she made her way downstairs, she noticed Nathan tinkering with a broken coffee machine in the corner of the kitchen. He glanced up, surprised to see her so early. "You're up before the rooster today," he teased. Evelyn ignored his sarcasm and poured herself a cup of coffee. "What's on the list for today?" Nathan raised an eyebrow, wiping his hands on a rag. "Are you asking to help?" "Don't make a big deal out of it," she replied sharply, though her tone lacked its usual bite. "I just want to get this place back in order." Nathan studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Fine. We've got to clear out the dining room and fix the broken chairs before the delivery truck comes this afternoon. Think you can handle that?" Evelyn met his gaze with uncharacteristic resolve. "Watch me." The dining room was a shadow of its former self. Dust coated the tables, cobwebs hung in the corners, and the once elegant chandelier swayed precariously from the ceiling. Evelyn tied back her hair and got to work, hauling broken chairs into a pile near the door. At first, her movements were clumsy, but as the hours passed, she found a rhythm. Margie joined her mid-morning, bringing a plate of muffins and a pitcher of lemonade. "You've got some fire in you today," she said with a smile, setting the tray on a table Evelyn had just polished. "Your mother would be proud." Evelyn paused, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I never really knew much about her," she admitted, her voice quieter. "She died when I was young." Margie's expression softened. "She had big dreams for this place, Evelyn. She wanted it to be a place where people felt at home. That's why she worked so hard to keep it running. Maybe some of that is in you too." The words struck a chord, and Evelyn felt a lump rise in her throat. She turned back to her work, hiding her emotions behind the scrape of a chair leg against the floor. For the first time, she saw the inn not as a burden, but as something worth fighting for. By the time the delivery truck arrived, the dining room looked transformed. The tables were polished, the chairs repaired, and the windows cleaned, allowing sunlight to flood the space. Nathan stood in the doorway, surveying the progress with a nod of approval. "Not bad," he said, his tone grudgingly complimentary. "I'm impressed." Evelyn smirked, though a faint blush crept into her cheeks. "Don't get used to it." As the truck unloaded fresh linens and supplies, Evelyn felt a spark of pride. The work had been hard, but the results were tangible. For the first time since arriving, she felt like she was making progress. The next few weeks marked a shift in Evelyn's approach. While she still struggled with the physical demands of the work, she began to see the inn through different eyes. Every repaired chair, scrubbed floor, and cleared room brought it one step closer to its former glory. And with each small victory, she felt her confidence grow. Nathan, though skeptical at first, began to acknowledge her efforts. Their conversations, once filled with sarcasm and tension, became easier. He even showed her how to repair a broken window pane without rolling his eyes too much. One afternoon, while Evelyn was trimming the overgrown bushes near the entrance, Ruth Harris, an elderly neighbor, stopped by with a basket of freshly picked vegetables. Ruth was a kind but sharp-tongued woman who had lived in Greenridge her entire life. "I thought you might need these," Ruth said, handing Evelyn the basket. "You look like you could use a decent meal." Evelyn smiled, accepting the offering. "Thank you, Ruth. I'm still figuring out how to use half the kitchen equipment, but I'll try." Ruth chuckled, her eyes twinkling. "You're not what I expected when I heard Reginald's daughter was taking over. But maybe that's a good thing." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "What exactly did you expect? Someone who'd be gone in a week?" Ruth replied bluntly. "But you've lasted longer than that. And from what I've seen, you've got a bit of fight in you." Evelyn didn't know how to respond. Instead, she watched as Ruth walked back down the road, the basket of vegetables cradled in her arms, a reminder that she wasn't entirely alone in this endeavor. That evening, Evelyn joined Nathan and Margie in the kitchen to prepare dinner. It was a simple meal, roast chicken, fresh vegetables, and warm bread, but felt like an accomplishment. As they sat around the small dining table, a comfortable silence settled over them. Nathan broke it first. "I'll admit, I didn't think you'd stick around this long." Evelyn smirked. "I'm full of surprises." Margie chuckled, pouring herself another glass of iced tea. "You two bicker like an old married couple." Evelyn rolled her eyes, but she couldn't deny the warmth that had begun to replace the initial tension between her and Nathan. The three of them finished their meal, and for the first time, Evelyn felt like part of a team. As the weeks went on, Evelyn continued to build bridges with the townsfolk. She visited the local farmers market, struck up conversations with shopkeepers, and even attended a town meeting about preserving Greenridge's historic landmarks. While not everyone warmed to her immediately, her genuine efforts began to shift opinions. Nathan noticed the change as well. One evening, as they worked side by side to repair a fence along the property line, he glanced at her and said, "You're starting to fit in here." Evelyn looked at him, surprised by the compliment. "I guess I'm learning." Nathan smiled, a rare, genuine smile that made her heart skip. "You're doing more than that." For the first time, Evelyn felt a glimmer of hope, not just for the inn, but for herself. The life she had once seen as a punishment was starting to feel like something more. The morning of the fundraiser dawned crisp and clear, the sunlight filtering through the trees surrounding the St. James Inn. Evelyn stood in the dining room, surveying the space with a mix of pride and nervous energy. Over the past few weeks, she had worked tirelessly to transform the inn, and this event was her first real chance to prove to the town and herself that she could succeed. The fundraiser had been Margie's idea, pitched over one of their late-night kitchen conversations. The inn desperately needed repairs beyond Evelyn's ability, and Margie suggested a community event to raise funds while reintroducing the inn as a place of importance to Greenridge. Evelyn had hesitated at first. Hosting a formal event seemed daunting, especially with the community still divided about her presence. But Margie's unwavering confidence and Nathan's reluctant encouragement convinced her to take the leap. By noon, the inn buzzed with activity. Tables laden with homemade pies, jams, and crafts lined the garden, and a small stage had been set up for local musicians. Evelyn flitted between tasks, directing volunteers, and making sure every detail was perfect. She wore a simple dress, nothing like the gowns she once wore to Manhattan galas, but it felt right for the occasion. "Not bad," Nathan said, appearing beside her with a tray of refreshments. His teasing tone was softer today, almost approving. "Looks like you've got a knack for this." Evelyn smirked. "Don't sound so surprised." As the afternoon progressed, more townsfolk arrived, drawn by the festive atmosphere and curiosity about the inn's new owner. Evelyn greeted them with a warmth that felt more natural than she expected, and slowly, she saw the skepticism in their eyes begin to fade. One of the day's highlights was an auction, featuring items donated by local businesses and residents. Evelyn stood at the podium, her nerves threatening to overwhelm her as she introduced each item. But with Margie cheering from the crowd and Nathan giving her a subtle thumbs up, she pushed through, her confidence growing with each bid. When the final item, a vintage clock donated by Ruth, sold for a substantial amount, the crowd erupted in applause. Evelyn felt a swell of emotion, a mix of relief and gratitude. She had done it. As the sun set and the event wound down, Evelyn stood on the porch, watching the last of the guests depart. Nathan joined her, leaning against the railing. "You pulled it off," he said, his voice low. She glanced at him, a small smile playing on her lips. "We pulled it off." For the first time, Evelyn felt like she truly belonged, not just to the inn, but to the community. The night after the fundraiser, the inn was quiet. Evelyn sat by the fireplace, sipping a cup of tea and reflecting on the day's success. Margie had gone to bed early, and the faint sound of Nathan hammering away in the workshop drifted through the still air. Curiosity got the better of her. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and followed the noise, finding Nathan bent over a workbench, repairing one of the auction items that hadn't sold. He looked up when she entered, his expression unreadable. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "Just wanted to thank you for today," Evelyn said, stepping closer. "I couldn't have done it without you." Nathan shrugged, his focus returning to the clock. "You didn't need me as much as you think." Evelyn hesitated, then leaned against the workbench. "You're not from Greenridge, are you?" He paused, the tools in his hands stilling. "No," he said finally. "I came here a few years ago, after things didn't work out somewhere else." She sensed the weight behind his words, but didn't press. "You've never mentioned your family or your past." Nathan sighed, setting the clock aside. "There's not much to tell. I used to run a business with my brother, a small construction company. We built houses, remodeled old ones like this in, but we got in over our heads with a big project. When it fell through, we lost everything. My brother blamed me, and I haven't talked to him since." Evelyn frowned, the pain in his voice cutting through her. "That must have been hard." He nodded. "It was. But I came here, started over. The people in this town gave me a chance, and I figured the least I could do was stick around and help where I could." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Evelyn thought about her own journey, the mistakes she'd made, the bridges she'd burned, and felt a surprising kinship with Nathan. "You know," she said softly, "you're not the only one trying to prove something." Nathan glanced at her, his eyes searching hers. "I guess that makes two of us." The conversation stayed with Evelyn long after she returned to her room. Nathan's story wasn't so different from hers, and it gave her a new perspective on his gruff demeanor. He wasn't just a handyman. He was someone who had faced failure and fought to rebuild his life. The next morning, as they worked together to repair a broken fence along the property line, their usual banter carried a lighter tone. Evelyn found herself laughing more easily, her guarded walls lowering inch by inch. "You're starting to get the hang of this," Nathan said, nodding toward her handiwork. "Don't sound so shocked," she replied, smirking. I'm a fast learner. Nathan chuckled, and for the first time, Evelyn felt like they were on equal footing, not as adversaries, but as allies. Evelyn's days at the inn settled into a rhythm. With the fundraiser success, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The dining room gleamed, the gardens were flourishing, and bookings were slowly starting to trickle in. But just as things seemed to be improving, a shadow loomed over her progress. It began with a letter. Evelyn found it one crisp morning, slipped under the door of the inn. The envelope was plain, but the bold corporate letterhead made her stomach tighten. She tore it open, her eyes scanning the neatly typed words. To Ms. Evelyn St. James, we represent Ridgeview Acquisitions, a company interested in purchasing your property for future development. We believe this transaction would be mutually beneficial. Her grip on the letter tightened as she read on. The offer was generous, more money than she had ever thought the inn was worth. But it came with a catch. Ridgeview planned to demolish the inn and replace it with a modern chain hotel. The history, the charm, the very soul of the property, they didn't care about any of it. Nathan found her in the dining room, the letter clutched in her hand and her expression stormy. "What's wrong?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. Evelyn thrust the letter at him without a word. He read it quickly, his jaw tightening. "They've been sniffing around Greenridge for years," he said. "This isn't the first time they've tried to buy a property here." "And the townsfolk?" Evelyn asked. "What do they think about this?" Nathan hesitated. "Some people are tempted. Ridgeview's offers are hard to ignore, especially for folks who've been struggling. But most of them hate the idea of losing what makes this town special." Evelyn sank into a chair, her mind racing. She had worked too hard to let the inn fall into the hands of a soulless corporation. But the offer was undeniably tempting, especially with the financial strain still looming over her. Over the next week, the threat of Ridgeview's presence became impossible to ignore. Representatives from the company began visiting local businesses, making their pitch to skeptical but weary owners. Evelyn even caught sight of one of them walking down Main Street, his polished suit and briefcase a stark contrast to the town's rustic charm. The tension in the community was palpable. At a town meeting that Friday, Evelyn sat among the townsfolk, listening as arguments broke out over the potential sale of properties. Some saw it as an opportunity for growth, while others feared it would destroy Greenridge's identity. When it was Evelyn's turn to speak, she stood slowly, the weight of their attention pressing on her. "I know I'm still new here," she began, her voice steady. "But this inn isn't just a building to me. It's a piece of history, a place with roots and memories. Selling it to Ridgeview might bring money, but what will it cost us in the long run?" The room fell silent, her words resonating with more people than she expected. As she sat down, Nathan leaned over and whispered, "That was impressive." Evelyn managed a faint smile, but her confidence wavered. The battle against Ridgeview was just beginning. Evelyn woke to chaos. The sharp sound of shattering glass jolted her awake, and she scrambled to her feet, pulling on a jacket as she ran downstairs. The sight that greeted her in the dining room made her heart sink. One of the large front windows had been smashed, shards of glass littering the floor. Chairs were overturned, and a crude message scrawled in red paint on the wall read, "Sell or suffer." Nathan arrived moments later, his face darkening as he took in the scene. "Ridgeview," he muttered, the accusation heavy in his tone. "You think they did this?" Evelyn asked, her voice trembling. "It's their style," Nathan said grimly. "They don't like resistance." Evelyn's hands clenched into fists. "They can't get away with this." "We'll clean this up," Nathan said, his voice steady. "But we need to be careful. If they're willing to resort to this, they won't stop here." The day was consumed by repairs. Nathan boarded up the broken window while Evelyn scrubbed the paint from the wall, her anger fueling her every movement. Margie arrived later, her usually cheerful demeanor replaced by worry. "I don't like this," Margie said as she helped sweep up the broken glass. "This town doesn't need more trouble." "We won't let them win," Evelyn said firmly. "This means too much to give up now." Nathan glanced at her, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. You've got more fight in you than I thought." As the day wore on, the physical labor helped ease some of Evelyn's frustration, but the sense of unease lingered. That night, as she lay in bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that Ridgeview's sabotage was just the beginning. The next few days brought more complications. A pipe burst in the kitchen, flooding the floors just as a group of guests arrived. Supplies Evelyn had ordered were mysteriously delayed, and rumors began circulating in town that Ridgeview was targeting other properties as well. Despite the setbacks, Evelyn refused to back down. She spent her days working tirelessly to keep the inn running and her evenings meeting with townsfolk to rally support. Slowly, she began to see the impact of her efforts. Ruth stopped by with fresh produce for the kitchen, a subtle but meaningful gesture of solidarity. A local carpenter offered to help repair the window for free. "People are starting to see what you're trying to do," Nathan said one evening as they worked side by side in the garden. "You're making a difference." Evelyn looked at him, her determination solidifying. "So are you." For the first time, she felt a flicker of hope. The fight against Ridgeview wouldn't be easy, but she wasn't in it alone. Evelyn stood in the newly repaired dining room, her heart racing as she adjusted the fresh table linens. The inn was hosting its first group booking since her arrival, a small family reunion for the Harris clan, one of the town's oldest families. It was a modest event, but to Evelyn, it felt monumental. After weeks of setbacks and sabotage, this was her chance to prove that the inn was still a place where memories could be made. Margie bustled into the room, balancing a tray of steaming pies. "These should keep everyone happy," she said, her smile returning a sliver of confidence to Evelyn. "I hope so," Evelyn replied, smoothing a wrinkle in the tablecloth. "If this doesn't go well, I'm not sure I can convince anyone else to book." Margie patted her shoulder. "You've done the work, Evelyn. Now let the place speak for itself." As the guests began to arrive, Evelyn greeted each one with a warm smile, doing her best to mask her nerves. The Harises were polite but reserved, their conversations tinged with curiosity about the inn's new owner. Evelyn overheard snippets of whispered comments. "She's Reginald's daughter, isn't she? And looks like she's trying, at least," and pushed herself to remain composed. Dinner was the real test. Evelyn and Margie had spent hours preparing a menu that blended local favorites with a few of Evelyn's personal touches. As the plates were served, she watched anxiously, scanning the guests' faces for signs of approval. To her relief, smiles began to spread around the room. Conversations grew livelier, laughter filled the air, and the occasional "this is delicious" reached her ears. Even Ruth Harris, the family matriarch known for her sharp tongue, gave a small nod of approval as she sampled the roast chicken. Nathan appeared beside Evelyn, holding a tray of drinks. "Looks like they're enjoying themselves," he said, his tone lighter than usual. Evelyn exhaled, a genuine smile breaking through her usual guarded expression. "I think we pulled it off." "You did most of the pulling," Nathan replied, his smirk softening into something closer to admiration. As the evening wound down, Ruth approached Evelyn, her sharp eyes studying her closely. "You've done a fine job tonight," she said, her voice firm but kind. "This place feels alive again." Evelyn felt a lump rise in her throat, but she managed a steady reply. "Thank you, Ruth. That means a lot." When the last guests departed, Evelyn stood in the empty dining room, the warmth of the evening still lingering in the air. She turned to Nathan, who was stacking chairs with his usual efficiency. "Do you think this could be a turning point?" she asked, her voice tinged with hope. Nathan paused, meeting her gaze. "I think you've already started turning things around." For the first time since her arrival, Evelyn allowed herself to believe that the inn could truly thrive again. Evelyn's high spirits from the Harris family event were short-lived. A few days later, she received a package from her father, delivered by courier. Inside was a thick stack of legal documents, accompanied by a handwritten note. "Evelyn, I hope you're making progress. The inn's future isn't just about you. It's tied to a much bigger picture. Consider this a nudge in the right direction." "Dad?" Confused, Evelyn flipped through the documents, her confusion quickly turning to anger. The papers detailed Ridgeview Acquisitions' plans to purchase several properties in Greenridge, including the inn. Worse, they included correspondence between her father and Ridgeview executives outlining his approval of their tactics. Her hands shook as she set the papers down. Her father, who had sent her here to prove her worth, was actively undermining her efforts. It wasn't just a betrayal of her trust. It was a blatant attempt to push her toward failure. Nathan found her pacing the kitchen, the documents spread out on the table. "What's going on?" he asked, his brow furrowing. Evelyn slammed her hand against the table. "My father is working with Ridgeview. He's been backing them this whole time." Nathan's expression darkened. "You're sure?" She thrust the papers toward him. "See for yourself." Nathan scanned the documents, his jaw tightening as he read. "This explains a lot," he muttered. "The sabotage, the pressure on the town. He's trying to force your hand." Evelyn sank into a chair, her head in her hands. "I can't believe he would do this. He told me this was my chance to prove myself, but all he's done is set me up to fail." Nathan sat beside her, his voice calm but firm. "You've already proven yourself. The fundraiser, the guests, the way the town is starting to come around. That's all you, not him." Evelyn looked up at him, her eyes filled with frustration and determination. "Then I need to fight back. If he thinks I'm going to give up, he's wrong." Evelyn spent the next few days formulating a plan. She began reaching out to townsfolk, sharing her findings about Ridgeview's intentions and her father's involvement. At first, some were hesitant to believe her, but as the evidence mounted, their skepticism turned to anger. At the same time, Evelyn started researching legal options. She pored over zoning laws and historical preservation regulations, searching for any loopholes that could block Ridgeview's plans. Nathan helped where he could, his practical knowledge proving invaluable. The tension between Evelyn and her father reached a breaking point during a heated phone call. "You sent me here to save this place," Evelyn said, her voice trembling with anger. "But all you've done is sabotage me at every turn." "This is bigger than you, Evelyn," Reginald replied coldly. "The inn isn't profitable. Ridgeview's offer is the best chance it has. That's not your decision to make," she shot back. "This place isn't just about profit. It's about people, history, and community, something you clearly don't care about." Reginald's silence was deafening. When he finally spoke, his tone was icy. "Be careful, Evelyn. You're playing a dangerous game." The line went dead, but Evelyn's resolve only hardened. She wouldn't let her father or Ridgeview win. Evelyn woke to the sound of howling wind and rain lashing against the windows. The storm that had been forecasted for days had finally arrived, and was far worse than she'd expected. She pulled on her raincoat and made her way downstairs, where Nathan was already waiting, his expression grim. "Roof's leaking in 2 spots," he said, gesturing toward the buckets he had placed under the dripping ceilings. "And the power's out in the west wing." Evelyn groaned, her mind racing through the list of repairs they'd already struggled to complete. What else could go wrong? As if on cue, Margie rushed in, her boots leaving muddy prints on the floor. "The storm's taken out the fence by the garden," she said breathlessly, "and the river's rising fast. It might flood." Evelyn's stomach sank. The garden was one of the inn's few remaining draws, and the thought of losing it was unbearable. She turned to Nathan, determination flickering in her eyes. "We need to protect it." The hours that followed were a blur of frantic activity. Evelyn, Nathan, and Margie worked in the pouring rain, securing sandbags along the riverbank and patching the gaps in the fence. Evelyn's hands ached, and her clothes were soaked through, but she refused to stop. The inn had become more than a project. It was her lifeline, her purpose. As the storm intensified, the power flickered and went out completely, plunging the inn into darkness. Evelyn lit candles and guided the few remaining guests to safety in the main hall, doing her best to keep them calm. Nathan found her in the kitchen, where she was attempting to start the backup generator. "You don't have to do this alone," he said, his voice cutting through the sound of rain pounding on the roof. Evelyn looked up, her face streaked with dirt and rain. "I don't have a choice. If we lose this place..." "You won't," Nathan interrupted, his tone firm. "Not while I'm here." Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, the chaos around them seemed to fade. Evelyn nodded, her resolve hardening. Together, they managed to get the generator running, casting a dim but steady light over the inn. By the time the storm finally subsided, the damage was extensive. Several rooms were flooded, the garden was in ruins, and the roof needed immediate repairs. Evelyn stood in the front yard, surveying the wreckage with a heavy heart. But as the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, she noticed something unexpected. Neighbors were arriving, tools in hand, ready to help. Ruth was among them, her sharp eyes scanning the damage as she barked orders at the younger volunteers. "You're not alone in this, Evelyn," Ruth said firmly. "We'll rebuild." Evelyn felt a lump rise in her throat as she looked around at the people who had come to her aid. Despite the setbacks, she realized she had something Ridgeview couldn't take away, a community that believed in her. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Volunteers from across Greenridge worked tirelessly to repair the damage left by the storm. Evelyn threw herself into the work, her exhaustion tempered by a renewed sense of purpose. Nathan coordinated the roofing repairs while Margie organized meals for the workers. Evelyn focused on restoring the garden, determined to bring it back to life. It was backbreaking work, but with each weed pulled and each plant replanted, she felt a growing sense of pride. The community's support was overwhelming. Farmers donated seeds and tools, local businesses offered supplies at discounted rates, and even the town's children pitched in, carrying water and planting flowers. Evelyn was struck by the generosity and resilience of the people she had once viewed as strangers. One evening, as the repairs neared completion, the townsfolk gathered in the inn's dining room for a potluck dinner. The air was filled with laughter and the aroma of home-cooked dishes, and for the first time in months, the inn felt alive. Ruth stood to give a toast, her voice cutting through the chatter. "To Evelyn," she said, raising her glass. "She's proven that this inn is more than just a building. It's a part of who we are. And thanks to her, it'll be here for generations to come." The room erupted in applause, and Evelyn felt her cheeks flush. She glanced at Nathan, who gave her a small nod of approval. After the dinner, Nathan found her on the porch, gazing out at the moonlit fields. "You've come a long way," he said, leaning against the railing. Evelyn smiled, her heart full. "I couldn't have done it without you, or the town." Nathan chuckled. "Maybe not, but you're the one who brought them together." For the first time, Evelyn allowed herself to believe that she had truly earned her place in Greenridge. It wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. With the storm behind them and the inn's restoration nearly complete, Evelyn began to shift her focus to securing its future. The battle against Ridgeview was far from over, and the corporation's representatives had only grown more aggressive in their tactics. Evelyn knew that if she wanted to protect the inn and Greenridge, she needed a definitive plan. One morning, as she sipped coffee in the kitchen, Nathan handed her a folder filled with documents. "I thought these might help," he said, sitting across from her. Evelyn opened the folder to find research on zoning laws, historical preservation statutes, and property ownership regulations. Nathan had compiled everything they might need to challenge Ridgeview legally. "How did you get all this?" she asked, her brows furrowing as she flipped through the pages. Nathan shrugged. "I've been around this kind of work long enough to know where to look. Figured you could use it." Evelyn felt a pang of gratitude as she met his eyes. "This is incredible. Thank you." Over the next few weeks, Evelyn and Nathan worked tirelessly to build their case. They pored over the documents late into the night, highlighting key points and strategizing ways to block Ridgeview's plans. Evelyn reached out to local officials, presenting her findings and rallying support from the town. Meanwhile, Ridgeview continued its campaign, spreading rumors and offering increasingly lucrative deals to property owners. Some residents were tempted, but Evelyn's determination inspired others to stand firm. The pressure mounted as Ridgeview announced plans for a town hall meeting to present their proposal. Evelyn knew this would be her chance to make her case to the entire community, but the thought of speaking in front of a crowd filled her with anxiety. "You'll do fine," Nathan said the night before the meeting, sensing her unease. "You've got the truth on your side." Evelyn nodded, taking a deep breath. "I just hope it's enough." The town hall was packed. Ridgeview's sleek representatives stood at the front, their polished smiles and tailored suits a stark contrast to the humble townsfolk filling the seats. Evelyn sat near the back, clutching her notes as she listened to their presentation. When it was her turn to speak, she walked to the front, her heart pounding. She took a deep breath and began. "I know Ridgeview's offer sounds tempting," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves coursing through her. "But what they're offering isn't just money. It's the cost of our history, our identity, and everything that makes Greenridge special." She outlined her findings, presenting legal arguments and highlighting the cultural importance of the inn and other threatened properties. She spoke passionately about the community's resilience and the power of preserving their shared heritage. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Evelyn returned to her seat, her hands trembling but her heart swelling with pride. Despite her victory at the town hall, Evelyn knew the fight wasn't over. Ridgeview's executives weren't ones to back down, and she suspected they would escalate their efforts. Her suspicions were confirmed when she received an invitation to a high-profile gala in New York City, hosted by none other than her father. The event was a gathering of powerful business leaders, including Ridgeview's top executives. Evelyn knew this was her chance to confront them directly and secure the inn's future once and for all. The gala was a far cry from the rustic charm of Greenridge. Glittering chandeliers, sleek modern decor, and the hum of polished conversations surrounded Evelyn as she stepped into the grand ballroom. She wore a simple but elegant dress, a reminder of the life she had once embraced but no longer longed for. Spotting her father across the room, Evelyn approached him with purpose. "We need to talk," she said, her voice firm. Reginald raised an eyebrow but motioned for her to follow him to a quieter corner. "I assume this is about Ridgeview," he said, his tone as cold as ever. "You need to call off their plans," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the tension between them. "The inn belongs to Greenridge, not to some faceless corporation." Reginald studied her, his expression unreadable. "And what makes you think you have the authority to make that decision?" "Because I've earned it," she replied, her eyes flashing. "I've worked harder in the past few months than I ever have in my entire life. The inn isn't just a building to me. It's a part of who I am now." Her father's gaze softened, just slightly. "You've changed," he said quietly. "I had to," Evelyn said. "And you should too. This isn't about money, Dad. It's about legacy." Evelyn's confrontation with Ridgeview's executives was no less intense. Armed with Nathan's research and her newfound confidence, she presented a compelling case against their plans, citing legal loopholes and community support as insurmountable obstacles. By the end of the night, even Ridgeview's most stubborn representatives were forced to acknowledge that their efforts would be met with relentless resistance. When Evelyn left the gala, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time, she felt like she had truly won, not just for the inn, but for herself. Evelyn stepped off the train at the Greenridge station, the crisp country air welcoming her back like an old friend. The gala in New York had been a whirlwind, but the victory against Ridgeview had left her feeling lighter, freer. For the first time, she felt like she had truly earned her place in both the world of Greenridge and the legacy her mother had dreamed of for the inn. Nathan was waiting for her by the truck, leaning casually against the door with a slight smirk. "Figured you might need a ride," he said. Evelyn smiled as she approached him. "What gave it away?" "The heels," he teased, glancing at her practical but still stylish footwear. "You've been gone too long. You're starting to dress like a city girl again." Evelyn laughed, a sound that felt easy and genuine. "Let's just say I'm learning to balance both worlds." As they drove back to the inn, Nathan filled her in on the progress made in her absence. The garden had been fully restored, the rooms were fully booked for the next month, and the townsfolk were buzzing with excitement over a new festival Evelyn had suggested hosting at the inn. "You've turned this place around," Nathan said as they pulled into the driveway. "You should be proud." Evelyn gazed at the inn, now standing tall, and vibrant against the backdrop of rolling fields. "We turned it around," she corrected, her voice soft but firm. Over the next few weeks, Evelyn threw herself into the final stages of the inn's revival. She worked alongside Nathan and Margie to prepare for the festival, which would celebrate Greenridge's history and bring the community together. The townsfolk rallied behind her, donating time, supplies, and ideas to make the event a success. One evening, as Evelyn hung lanterns in the garden, she paused to admire the scene. The inn glowed with life, its once faded walls now painted with warmth and care. The sound of laughter and the hum of preparations filled the air, and Evelyn felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Nathan appeared beside her, holding a box of lights. "Looks like you've found your place," he said, his tone laced with admiration. Evelyn glanced at him, her heart swelling. "I think I have." The festival was everything Evelyn had hoped for and more. The inn was packed with visitors, both locals and out-of-towners drawn by the promise of good food, music, and community. The garden was alive with color, the dining room buzzed with conversation, and the air was filled with the sound of a local band playing on the makeshift stage. Evelyn moved through the crowd, greeting guests and soaking in the energy of the event. Everywhere she looked, she saw signs of the inn's transformation: restored furniture, polished floors, and smiling faces. It was a far cry from the broken, neglected building she had arrived at months ago. As the sun set and lanterns lit up the garden, Ruth stood to give a speech. Her voice carried over the crowd, steady and proud. "This inn has always been a cornerstone of Greenridge," she said. "And thanks to Evelyn St. James, it's become that again." The crowd erupted into applause, and Evelyn felt a lump rise in her throat. She glanced at Nathan, who gave her an encouraging nod. Later that night, as the festival wound down, Evelyn and Nathan stood on the porch, watching the last of the guests depart. The silence that followed was peaceful, the kind that spoke of hard work rewarded and battles won. "You did it," Nathan said, his voice low. "The inn's not just standing, it's thriving." Evelyn turned to him, a soft smile on her lips. "We did it," she corrected, her eyes meeting his. Together, the weight of everything they'd been through hung in the air between them, unspoken but understood. Nathan reached for her hand, his touch grounding her in the moment. "You belong here, Evelyn," he said, his voice steady. "And so do I." Evelyn squeezed his hand, her heart full. For the first time in her life, she felt truly at home, not just in Greenridge, but within herself.